Good morning, welcome to Greenwood Bonsai Studio today. This weekend just gone, we've had our autumn open house. It's an event we've held now for a couple of years, and as part of that event we have an exhibition of some of my personal trees on display, some specimen trees. So first of all, for those of you that did make it over this weekend, I'd really like to thank you for turning up. The attendance was very good. It was up on the year before. We had a really nice time. We had the log burner going in the studio here and in the shop. It was nice to welcome customers. We had people travelling several hours to come here and enjoy the trees. When we did this event last year, we timed it just right at the end of October. We had some amazing autumn colour, so we thought we'd do it at the same time this year, but the weather's been a little bit against us. We've had such an early autumn here in the UK that a lot of the autumn colour, particularly on the maples, the leaves dropped a few weeks ago. So we've got more evergreens on display than we anticipated we would have. So for those of you that made it, thanks very much for coming along. And for those of you that couldn't make it and didn't arrive, we thought we'd just give you a little sneak peek of what you missed, and maybe that would encourage you to turn up next year and help us out. So we'll show you a few of the trees here, and these are all trees that aren't normally on display, so it's a good time to see them. And I'll just run you through, tell you a little bit about them to give you an insight. We do actually have a sheet here, so if you come and view the exhibition, we have a little a sheet with notes on that tell you this information. So I think when you're looking at trees like this on exhibition, it's not the full information if you just say this is a Japanese larch, and sometimes you know whose pot it is in. We give a little snippet of information saying how long I've had the tree for, or where it came from, who made the pot, little bits of information. I find that you take it in better as a viewer. And this is an Ezo Spruce, Picea jezoensis, imported from Japan a number of years ago, owned by me for about 10 years or so, in a twin trunk style. The good thing with Ezos, compact, tiny growth, very bright green. They stay green all through the winter. Dark bark, beautiful flaky bark, mature tree. Planted into a Sperling Ceramics bonsai pot with a matte glaze. You know, a lot of people say you don't use glazed pots for evergreens, but I don't consider this really to be a glazed pot because of its sort of matte finish, and I just like the tones here, the contrasting tones with the bark. When this bark's wet and it's dark, it's even more striking. And this is on just a very rustic display stand because it harmonises with the texture within the bark of the tree. This is my large Shishigashira maple, imported from Japan last year, and this will feature in a video upcoming in spring, because when it came in this year it was already in leaf. You can see by my hand the size of the trunk on that. This pot is 24 inch across, and it needs to be 22 inch front to back to accommodate the nebari and the surface roots. So this will feature in a video next year. We need to get it into a shallower pot. I really want it in something about 2/3 this depth. This is too heavy and clunky for the tree, and it's absolute terrible to move and lift, isn't it, Josh? It's so much heavier than it needs to be. So we're going to try and get it into a slightly shallower pot, which will give more emphasis to the surface roots and the heavy trunk. So we've got a few pots lined up for that. We'll probably do a video on it to choose the best one next year. And I've got a few Shishigashiras in my collection, and all the others went bright orange about 2 weeks ago and all the leaves fell off. This one is very slow to turn. It's still in green leaf. It's quite unusual, so didn't quite get its timing right. Here's a European beech. This was a tree that was collected from the wild in southern England about 30 years ago. Subsequently, it was cut down and grown on an allotment by the owner for a number of years before being transferred into a bonsai pot. It's in this vintage, absolutely stunning Gordon Duffet bonsai pot, which really suits it. Now, we were thinking yesterday, the trouble is, we were thinking this pot would really suit this Shishigashira, and it would fit. And I would love to have this tree in that pot. Can you see the difference between the two? The depth of that, if we got this tree into it, would look so much nicer. But the trouble is, if I take the beech out this pot, then I've got to put the beech into another pot. So we might end up doing that yet, I'm not quite sure. Here we've got a dwarf black pine, Pinus thunbergii, Kotobuki, very short needle, and it's just lifted in here because it's quite bright and vibrant and it looks nice. There's a few little old needles we were picking off it last week. Heavy trunk, absolutely, really don't like it at all in this pot. It looks like it's too deep and heavy, like it's planted in a bowling ball. We need to try and get it out of this pot. This spring I didn't find a pot suitable for it, so it's been delayed for another year, but I am on the lookout for a nice bonsai pot for this. Again, something shallower. This next one is a field maple. I've owned this for about 20 years. This originally started as an air layer. So an air layer is where you remove a ring of bark on a mature tree, a fully sized, fully grown tree in this case, and it puts out adventitious roots, and then it can be severed from the parent plant. So this was an air layer here with these roots, and this root here, when I first bought this tree, this was about finger thickness. I've had it about 20 years. I worked on it for about 8 years, and I sold it to a customer, and then when he sold it, I bought it back, and I'm keeping it. It's a raft style or sinuous style with a trunk, the branch laid down, and then the branches off that branch are now grown as trunks in a slanting vertical fashion. Obviously it's just dropped its leaves. The thing I really like about this is in a Petra Angelika pot, and the piece of magic for me with this tree is that this glaze line here drifts up and down, and it really mimics this trunk line that peaks here at the same point and then drops down. Little sort of subtleties like that, I get a kick out of things like that, and a lot of people wouldn't even notice, but people that do, it makes it a little bit more magical. It's difficult to get the twigginess on a field maple if you've worked on them. They're quite a coarse foliage, not quite as delicate as a Japanese maple, so it's always a lot more difficult thing to achieve. This is a mountain hemlock, Suga diversifolia, imported from Japan last year. We've been trimming it and a little bit of wire on it, pulling this branch down. I've wired this section. It's very, very commonly mistaken for a yew tree by people until they look at the bark and realise it just isn't a yew tree. The foliage is very, very similar. It's a lot more of a blunt needle than the western hemlock, so it does look more like a yew, so it's quite deceiving. In a vintage Yamaki bonsai pot. This next one is this is called the Slug. You might have seen this before. We nicknamed this tree the Slug. I bought it last year. When I first saw it, I thought it was quite unique, and I thought it's a nice little tree, and then I thought, well, it's an ugly little tree, and then I decided it was nice and ugly, so I bought it. It was in a tiny little oval pot at the time. It's an Acer palmatum suma beni, so it has quite a large leaf with bright red tips, and this is planted into a Koyo bonsai pot. Very showy pot, quite a flamboyant pot, but quite a flamboyant tree because it's got a green leaf with like the tips are all red, like painted fingernails. So when it's in spring colour, the tree can balance the colour of the pot. But it's grown quite a lot this year, and it's almost visually, when this is in leaf, this pot now starts to look a bit too small for it. But I really like it in this pot, so a pity I can't just make this pot an inch bigger. We had a selection of bonsai pots on display, just some vintage ones. Some copies of my father's book here, look. Dorling Kindersley book, Complete Book of Bonsai. Got a few different versions of that kicking around. Some John Narker books, some vintage books in there that are unusual. Here we've got a Shishigashira that I bought in Japan at the World Bonsai Convention in, was it 2017? Been developing the surface roots on it since then. It's quite twiggy, really nice tree. This is one of the only ones that got a bit of leaf on. We actually lifted this in here a week ago to keep it out of the wind, to keep the leaf. And on Saturday, it's gone a bit more shriveled, hasn't it, Josh? Just in the last day, I'd say. These leaves are just hanging on. As soon as we lift this out now, look, there you go, autumn straight away. They've just been hanging on for the event. You know, this always changes to autumn late, so we did manage to get it in here with a bit of colour. So now we'll knock these leaves off and it can go back outside. But they're not holding on by much at all. If we had a strong wind last week and it was outside, these leaves would already have been off it. And this is in a vintage Petra Engelka bonsai pot with beautiful green and gunmetal grey glaze. Just looks absolutely stunning in there all through the year. Blue cedars are a favourite of mine, as you know, blue Atlas cedar. And this one we did a video on. If you look back at our videos, you'll see a video of me working on this and repotting it. I've been working on it for about a year and a half. It's about a 50-year-old. It was grown in a patio tub in a lady's garden for a number of years. And we're just working on it, developing it. The front's in here towards me. Need to develop these branches down more here. And this is very static, this section. So I'll need to grow stuff down to hide this section. We're starting to do that. It will take a few years. There's no rush with something like that. We'll just take our time with it and get it into shape. It's the first time we've lifted that in to display it in this sort of setting. It's quite dramatic, semi-cascade. Here's a trinate maple imported from Japan. This is from one of our customers owned this tree. So a shout out to Dane. This was his tree, and when he got out of the hobby, we purchased it from him. It was always a nice tree to work on while he owned it. The Ibagawa rock here is one of the nicest pieces of Ibagawa rock that I've seen. And we display this in summer, and it looks great in summer, but of course in summer you can't see this rock at all because this is covered with foliage, so you just see this section. So it's nice to display it in winter where you can fully appreciate the rock and also the refinement, the structure and the branches of the tree. Quite flaky bark on old tridents like this. Absolutely wonderful. In a vintage Walsall studio pot. This is about a 35-year-old Walsall pot. Really, really nice. The tone of this in autumn just picks up the tone in the bark and the trunk. There's a Japanese maple, Ukon maple, in a vintage Gordon Duffet pot. And again, the tones of this glaze pick up the tones within the bark. Bright green leaf on this and bright yellow in autumn. Obviously it's just dropped now, and we deliberately left it with a scattering of autumnal leaves on the surface. This next one's a blue cedar that's in training. It's one of about 6 trees that I bought to style. And it's had its ups and downs. I styled it, and then it was round the back, and some rabbits ate the low branches off it, so I had to regrow it and restyle it. So I've lost a couple of branches from in here. But this is a John Pitt pot, and I bought this pot 10 years ago before I even had a blue cedar. And I bought that pot and thought I will one day have a blue cedar to put into this pot. And it's took me 10 years to get one. Absolutely stunning, stunning glaze, harmonising with the foliage. So this is a European larch, collected and imported from Italy a number of years ago, owned by one of our customers. And when he passed away, he bought his collection of trees, and we've kept this one in his memory, and we put it on exhibition whenever we can. Lovely and autumnal needle. And this is a really craggy, ancient tree. Beautiful old bark, dead wood movement. And I matched this with an Ian Bailey pot, very rustic in design and feature. And then last year at the trophy show in Belgium, I bought this CHR stand in a rustic, distressed style. So it harmonises so nicely with the pot, and the pot also with the tree. So again, the subtlety of things like this makes a big difference when you're displaying a tree like that. This is a nice tree, I've not been out for a while. Western hemlock, it's about 50 to 60 years old. It was one of my father's trees. It's a weeping dwarf hemlock. It was grown by a guy who was into dwarf conifers. He used to grow dwarf conifers in his garden, in patio tubs and stuff. And we bought some trees off him that were suitable for bonsai. And my father styled and shaped this at that time. We were just regrowing some branches on it, working on some foliage pads on it. And the movement in this trunk here and the movement in this design pot work quite well together. Beautiful, weeping, graceful tree with quite some age to it. And here we've got a little Korean hornbeam that we just lifted in last minute because it had a bit of good autumn colour on it. This little bit here wants trimming actually, but movement, good taper. And this was a no-hoper. This was a tree that a customer gave me because it was a scraggy little tree growing in like a washing up bowl. And I cut about 70% of the tree off. There's a cut that I made here and here. So there's a massive section coming off here that we cut off, and I just kept this little bit. And he said it will never make anything. It's took me 15 years or so to develop this. And every time he used to come up and visit, I'd show him this tree that he gifted me that he said would never make anything. And it was always a source of amusement that it's made a nice little tree after all that many years. So in a Petra and Gelka pot. So just a little snippet of information just to show you a few of the trees that we had on display here. Our next event's going to be next May. Josh is just walking into everything, aren't you, Josh? What are you doing? Just walking backwards into chairs and things like that. So we're all tidied up in here. So now we need to get these trees lifted out. Our next event here will be next May, our bonsai bash. We'll do a similar sort of event and we'll do demonstrations and that sort of thing. So for now, we need to get the trees watered, get them lifted out the studio. We'll get some tables in here. We can work on some more trees and get back to work. So again, those of you that turn up this weekend, thank you very much. And those of you that didn't, I hope it's given you a little bit of an insight into what we do here at Greenwood Bonsai Studio. And we shall hope to see you in the future. Thank you very much.